John and Amy Worley are going to head up a team to go back and work on backpacks. We're going to start collecting some supplies, school supplies, here at our church, and take them up and go up, pack backpacks, and it's going to be a Wednesday through Saturday. So head up on Wednesday, come back on Saturday, work Thursday and Friday and Saturday morning, and head back that afternoon. So if you have an interest in that, we'll start a sign up this coming Sunday. There'll be a list out there at the desk. Okay? All right. We're looking at the family of David. Okay? We have just finished with Solomon. We've seen him build the temple. We've looked at the 3 books that he has attributed to writing, or at least collecting some things with, which were what? Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and there's another one, wasn't there? That's right, Song of Solomon. Okay? So he is collected some of those proverbs, wrote many of those proverbs himself. But let's just trace back where we were, do a quick review of the family of David, okay? And then we'll kind of move on from there into the kings of Israel. So the family of David is the first chart you see. This is a genealogical chart. You know that Ruth, the ladies are in the blue ovals, and the men are in the red triangles. Everybody with me on that genealogical chart? All right, so we know that Ruth, who was a Gentile, married Boaz. They had a son named Obed, who had a son named Jesse, and we all know that Jesse's little boy, David, was selected to be the king of Israel. Okay, so now, underneath David, which by the way was the youngest sons, if you see that his sister Zeruiah, you see her? Right to the left of him, Zeruiah. She's the one that had 3 boys named Joab, Abishai, and Ashiel. Okay? Now, if you remember the story, those aren't listed on there. I'm just throwing them out to you because this is just David's family tree. But Zeruiah, his sister, had Joab, who killed Abner. You remember that? Okay? And Abishai was Joab's brother, but they had another brother named Ashiel, who was killed by Abner, called Saul's army's commander. Okay, so that kind of all ties in, and then so Joab, because Abner killed Ashiel, Joab goes out and kills Abner. Just tying that in because that's family relations. You remember that story in the Bible? That is his nephews. Okay, so all those Joab, Ashiel, Abishai are his nephews. Okay, so tracing down that line then, you see the wives that we know of David. Look at all them women. Michal, whose daughter was she? Saul's daughter. Okay, and then you've got all these other wives. Abigail will stand out to you. Why? She was somebody's widow. Anybody remember? Nabal's widow, remember the vineyard? That's Abigail there. Then you got some other wives, and you'll see the heathen had other wives and concubines that are listed. But the third from the right is a lady named Bathsheba. All right, we all know who she is. That is Uriah's wife. Many times in the Bible, it's how she's referred to. She's in the line of Jesus as Uriah's wife. Uriah was one of his mighty men. Remember? And then he saw Uriah's wife up on the rooftop bathing, and they had a relationship they shouldn't have had, and there's a baby out of that. And so what does he do? He tries to get Uriah to come in and think that's his baby, and then that doesn't work. He sends Uriah to the front of the line, has the army to withdraw, in effect basically murdering Bathsheba's husband. Okay? So he committed adultery and murder with Bathsheba. But if you'll go down, you'll notice that she has a son named Solomon. And that's where we left off. Solomon was Bathsheba's son. He has a son, if you go down from there that's not listed, is Rehoboam. And that's where we're going to pick up tonight, is with Rehoboam. And that's where the kingdom is divided. And so through Saul and through David and through Solomon, the 12 tribes of Israel have been united. Now, I do want to point out one more thing to you. You see all those little red triangles from some of his wives? You'll notice that Maachah had a son named Absalom. All right, you know the story of Absalom in the Bible. Well, that's one of his sons. And Absalom kills I cannot pronounce all these names, Ahinoam's son Amnon. You see Amnon to the left there? So Absalom kills Ammon. All right? Now Ammon, why does he kill Ammon? Anybody remember? Oh, that's right. If you go down under other wives, you see this blue oval Tamar. You see Tamar down there? Well, Amnon rapes Tamar. And so Absalom kills Ammon. And so all kinds of dynamics. It's just a soap opera, isn't it? Just a soap opera is what I wanted to show you with that. And so why do I want us to understand this? Because this is David's line. At the very bottom of this paper, David's lineage is the very lineage of the Lord Jesus Christ, right? He has inherited the Davidic covenant. Don't ever forget the importance of the covenant that God makes with David in 2 Samuel 7, verses 4 through 17. David, according to the Bible, 2 times in 1 Samuel 13:14 and Acts 13:22, is referred to as a man after God's own heart. David is an essential person for us to understand the life of Israel and in the life of the Bible and in the life of Jesus. When Jesus comes back, He will reign on the throne of David. He will be a literal fulfillment of the Davidic covenant. So let's flip over there, and we'll just be real quick with these next 2 pages. The first page there is because the divided monarchies. You see that real quick? If you see the top part, that is pink. Of course, that is the northern kingdoms. There are 10 tribes that stay with that northern kingdom that they call Israel. So Israel used to be the 12 united tribes. If Solomon's son Rehoboam, now Solomon's the one who really caused the division, okay? It's because of what Solomon has done that it is divided. It's happened under Rehoboam's. He makes some very unwise decisions, but it's just a result of what Solomon's already done. But the 12 tribes are divided. That pink part at the top of that are the 10 northern tribes called Israel. The green section at the bottom is the nation of Judah. Okay? Those are 2 tribes. They're in the south, and that is the tribe of Judah, which Jesus comes from. He is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So out of the 12 tribes, Jesus comes from Judah, and Benjamin is also with Judah. So 2 southern tribes in the green, you see that? And the 10 northern tribes called Israel in the north. And the key over there on the left will tell you that. I would want you to find something. At the very top of the green section, you'll see Gibeon, a town called Gibeon. Down below that is a town called Jerusalem. That is the capital of, well, all 12 tribes, but then when they divided it became the capital of the 2 southern tribes. They kept the capital of Jerusalem. Well, what about the 10 northern tribes? If you'll go up from Bethel and go basically straight up, you'll see a town called Samaria. Okay? If you will, kind of circle that because that will be the capital for the 10 northern tribes. Okay? Now, let's go over to the next page, the divided kingdom. How is this one different from the first one? If you notice the little dotted lines, those dotted lines are the same as what we've just looked at. The dotted lines in the north are the pink from the previous page. The dotted lines in the south are the green from the previous page. So the dotted lines at the top are the 10 northern tribes. Now what you'll see different about this one is you see the color code over on the left on the key? That's showing you where those tribes are and in that kingdom of Israel. And then at the bottom, those dotted line at the bottom for the tribes of Judah is Judah and Benjamin. Benjamin is the orange and Judah is the brown. And so you'll see where those tribes are in the divided kingdom. That's why you've got 2 maps. One is just a big one that shows you the area. The next one breaks it down into where the tribes are at. Make sense to everybody? All right, let's flip over. And let's start looking at the kings of Israel. Now, there'll be some repetitiveness to this because it's important for us to understand it. And we're going to cover basically 4 Bible books tonight. 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles. We're going to do some of that again when we get into the prophets after we do the kings. So that's the way we're going to cover these books, by looking at the kings, by looking at the prophets. And then when you read these, I hope you'll have some background to understand the dynamics of their stories. At the tops, you see the kings of Israel. Okay? How many tribes make up the nation of Israel? 10 tribes. Okay, I see if he's listening. All right? The 10 tribes. Are they in the north or the south? Okay, they're in the north. Okay, so the kings of Israel are the northern 10 tribes. Would you write out to the right of that there are 9 different dynasties? 9 different dynasties that make up the nation of Israel, those 10 tribes. Throughout their history until they're taken into captivity by Assyria, there are 9 different dynasties in that. Now at the bottom you'll see the kings of Judah. Kings of Judah. They're in the south, and how many tribes make up Judah? 2, that's right. Judah and Benjamin. Now here's the thing to remember. Will you write out to the right of that? There is one dynasty in Judah. Anybody have any idea whose it is? The Davidic dynasty. All right? While there's 9 different dynasties in the north, when we read our Bible, God has been faithful to the Davidic covenant, and there is one dynasty in the south, where the city of Jerusalem is, where the temple is. Now, to the kings of Israel, going back up to the top, kings of Israel, those 10 northern tribes, would you write out to the left of that? No righteous kings. Not a one of those 19 kings that are listed there, not a single one honored the Lord God consistently. There were a couple that kind of repented toward the end a little bit, one that made some reforms that didn't last. But for the whole, not a single one of those was a righteous, godly king. A lot of times when you study that, you're going to say there were no good kings. But that's not necessarily true nationally. Omni was one of the best kings to spread the land and build up the army. But he didn't honor the Lord, so he wasn't righteous. He wasn't godly. In God's eyes, he was evil. Even though he did a lot of good things here on earth, he was an unrighteous king. So what do you need to remember about those 10 northern tribes of Israel? 9 different dynasties, and not one that honor the Lord God. God said they were wicked in His eyes, evil in His eyes. Now, if you go down to the very bottom after you see Hosea, who was bad. Now, just look out to the right of that. Bad, 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 bad. Look at number 7. Ahab. Really bad. Yeah, Jezebel didn't help. Really bad, all right? Satanic. He was probably the most evil of those listed. At the very bottom, if you want to write the date 721 BC, that's when those 10 nations were conquered by the nation of Assyria. Okay? Have y'all heard of the Assyrian captivity or the Assyrian dispersion? They come in and take those 10 northern tribes, conquer them, but they don't conquer the 2 southern tribes. Okay? So Assyria comes in and begins to take those people out of Israel and disperse them throughout the Assyrian Empire. Now, we'll get into that more as we talk more about it, but that's called the Assyrian dispersion or the Assyrian captivity. So those 10 nations, those 9 different dynasties, that place where there were no righteous kings, comes to an end in 721 BC. Now in 605 BC, Babylon defeats Assyria and Egypt. King Nebuchadnezzar comes in and defeats Assyria. Now what's going to happen later? Okay, 130 some years later, after Israel falls, Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon is going to come in and take the 2 southern tribes. We know that as the Babylonian captivity, which lasts 70 years. You with me so far? You remember this from Sunday school? Okay, we don't always get this in a sermon, but we learned this in Sunday school. Okay, so now let's go down and look at the kings of Judah. Okay? Now you notice that the first part that all those kings were bad, 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 bad. Now if you go down to the kings of Judah, this one dynasty, the Davidic dynasty, you'll notice that every so often you'll see one that's labeled as good. That's what they're calling good is a godly king. A righteous king. That didn't mean they did everything perfectly. Some of these toward their later part of their life, like Solomon, the wisest man on earth, fell. Okay? They weren't purely righteous, but overall, and some of them God used in big ways because their hearts were torn toward Him in revival and reform. Which of those are the good ones? These good kings, maybe bad Now, here's what's interesting. Omni, which was good in the eyes of men, was bad in the eyes of God. Some of these kings, if you looked at what they were able to do nationally and politically, you'd say, well, they were nothing. But when God looked at them and saw what they did spiritually, He said, that's a man after God's heart. That's someone that followed in the footsteps of David. Man might see their dynasty as horrid. It didn't grow. It didn't do anything. There's nothing politically gained. They were defeated by enemies. But God looked at it and said, they loved me and they served me. They honored me. So let's go and look at those that are good, because we're going to keep coming back to these that are good. Number 3 and 4, Asa and Jehoshaphat. Would you circle them or put a star by them or in some way just draw attention that they're the righteous kings, the godly kings? Go down to Numbers 8 and 9, Joash and Amaziah. Good kings. Now, notice number 7, the bad one, that's Athaliah. She is the only queen to rule. Okay, Athaliah. Number 10, Azariah. Good king. You may know him by a different name, Uzziah. We talk about Uzziah quite a bit because of Isaiah chapter 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. So Uzziah is number 10. Then after that, number 11, you can mark him. He had some good in him. He had some bad mixed in, but Jotham was a righteous king. And then you got a great king, number 13, Hezekiah. We'll talk about the great things that happened during Hezekiah. And the best king of all, number 16, would he stand? Josiah. What a king, Josiah. Now, at the very bottom of that, you can write the year 586 BC. That's when the Babylonian begins. And it lasts for 70 years of exile. Babylon defeats Assyria and Egypt in 605 BC. And from basically 18 down, Babylon allows Judah to keep some puppet kings, but they've got to pay an annual tax. Those last 3 are basically just puppet kings of Babylon. Would you turn with me in your Bibles to 2 Chronicles chapter 36? 2 Chronicles chapter 36. Look at verses 21 through 23. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, all the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. One of the reasons for a 70-year captivity in Babylon was to fulfill Sabbaths that were unkept. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Now, wait a second. How do we skip from Babylon to Persia? Well, the Persians joined up with the Medes and conquered the Babylonians. So at the end of that 7-year period of the Babylonian captivity, Cyrus, a Persian king, comes in and conquers the Babylonians. And so now we picked up with the new dynasty or the new reign. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up. So, when Persia and Cyrus comes in and conquers the Babylonians, what does he allow those people in captivity to do? Return home. And that's when we pick up with a new temple. Remember, we left off with Solomon's temple, right? Well, when the Babylonians come in, they destroy that temple in 586 BC. Destroy it. Take its stuff out and take it back to Babylon. Well, when Cyrus comes in Persia, he allows them to go back. And what did he just say? He allows them to build a house again for the Lord. And so that's where Zerubbabel's temple comes in. But all that's yet future. Let's start looking more in depth at all these kings we've just generally talked about. The next thing you see is a chronology. It's a 8.5 by 14 sheet, a chronology chart. And we'll start over on the left where you see the division of the kingdom. After Solomon's death, the kingdom is divided under the reign of Rehoboam. He is the king of the southern kingdom. He starts out with king of all 12, but then the nations divide, 10 in the north, Israel, 2 in the south, Judah and Benjamin, and Rehoboam rules over those 2 southern tribes. The king of the north is a man named Jeroboam. You've heard the name Jeroboam? Okay. He is the first king of the 10 tribes of Israel. Not the 12 tribes, but he is the first king of when they divide, of the 10 tribes of Israel in the north. Now, notice at the bottom, under there, Matthew traces Jesus' genealogy through Solomon's son, Rehoboam, listing 13 of the kings of Judah. Why? Because they're the Davidic dynasty, and Jesus is the son of David. Going over to the right there, you see about Elijah and Moses. We'll pick up that later. We'll look at the prophets a little bit. Go over to the far right. You see the fall of Israel. Assyria conquers Israel in 722 BC. Going down to the bottom left, King Hezekiah restores the temple and observes the Passover. We'll look more in depth at that, but Hezekiah is listed in Jesus' genealogy. Go over to where you see the spiral brown, where I copied that there. You see King Josiah finds the book of the law and brings revival in Judah. Well, Josiah is listed in Jesus' genealogy. If you skip over a couple more, the last 4 kings of Judah after Josiah all do evil. And then a couple more over, you see the fall of Judah. Babylon conquers Judah, destroys the temple in Jerusalem in 586 BC. What this is basically just the timeline that you'll see with years of it, of the rule of the kings. Flipping over the back of that, you'll see a chronology of those kings. Okay? You'll see where they rule and how they kind of rule beside each other, sometimes as co-regents for a number of years, ruling as together, and then one killing the other. What I want you to do as you look at this is the chronology of the dual kingdom. It is going to, we'll just look at it. The tribes of Judah are in the blue. The tribes of Israel are in the green. We'll start with the 2 southern tribes. Let's circle a few of them. You ready? And here's why I want you to circle them. These are the righteous kings, the godly kings. Circle Asa. Circle Jehoshaphat. We're only doing the blue kings right now. And then go down to where they're kind of 4 together on the far right. Joash, a righteous king. And then those bottom 2, Amaziah and Azariah. Azariah you know as who? Uzziah, all right. Going over to the next column that's blue, circle Jotham. Then down below him, Hezekiah. We're going to go a little bit more in depth with these guys in just a minute. And down at the bottom of that, Josiah. Okay, and you see the fall of Jerusalem at the very bottom in 586 BC. This is one that's important because you see where they reign together, and you'll see the length of those days. Israel is the one in the green. You don't need to circle any of them. Why? Because not a one in those 10 northern tribes of Israel are a righteous or godly king. After Samaria falls, you see that in 722 BC. After Samaria falls, Judah survives another 135, 136 years. So after the Assyrians come in and disperse the 10 northern tribes and conquer it, those 2 southern tribes survive for another 135, 136 years, depending on the months that fall there. They survive for quite a long time after that. Now, here's where we're going to go a little bit more in depth is on this next section, okay? And I want us to kind of review some of the main things of these kings. You've probably heard a lot of this before, but I want us to kind of have a good overview of these kings. What you're going to see in this lineup of rulers is 38 kings and 1 queen that should help us understand the history of Israel in the northern and the southern kingdoms. You'll see that they're divided. Israel on the left, the 10 northern tribes, and Judah on the bottom. Is everybody with me? The 2 southern tribes. You'll see it begins, though, at the top with the united kingdom of Saul, David, and Solomon. I've circled or highlighted David and Solomon because they're the line of Christ. And I always want in the Bible to know who is the lineage of Jesus, who is in this Davidic covenant. And while David and Solomon were the first 2 of those. Jeroboam is the first king of Israel in the north. He was handpicked by God to lead a reform, but, well, that didn't happen. And so he proved to be one of Israel's worst kings. For years afterward, evil kings were described as walking in the ways of Jeroboam. You'll see that again and again in the Bible. It was him who firmly established the split-off nation of Israel, uniting the 10 rebel tribes to prevent his people from worshiping in Jerusalem, which was now enemy territory. He built a new capital city, and he set up the notorious high places as alternate worship sites. Now remember that word high places, because in the rest of the Old Testament, from the prophets to the history, what are they trying to do? Tear down those high places, those areas of false worship. They were started under Jeroboam's reign. When it divides, God decides to abandon Israel during the reign of Jeroboam and the northern king's very first ruler. Well, while Jeroboam is reigning, you'll notice that Rehoboam, Solomon's son, reigns for 17 years, and then Abijah after that. But Rehoboam is sometimes he obeyed God, and sometimes he listened to the prophets, and sometimes he didn't. All the priests and the Levites, though, they came to Judah. They fled from the northern tribes. They came down to Judah because that's where the house of God was. That's where Solomon's temple was. And so when those 10 northern tribes banded together, the priests, the Levites, they needed the house of God. And so the vast majority of them came down to the south. Idolatry, though, began to find its way into Judah under Rehoboam's reign. And unfortunately, he set a pattern that wasn't always godly. Abijah, he had war with Israel in the north and dragged on throughout Abijah's 3-year reign. The 2 splinter nations were still adjusting to each other's independence. They didn't know how to do what they were doing. They were trying to figure it all out. Going over to the next column, Israel, going down to Nadab. He followed the errors of his father, Jeroboam, in every way, and he fell victim to a murder plot. Now, he was killed by a man named Baasha, who took over as king. You see that? Baasha took over as king and reigned for 24 years. Nadab only made it 2 years. Baasha showed no inclination to reverse the evil practices that were began by Jeroboam. It just continued all 24 of those years. Elah came in after that. He was the chariot commander, and he staged a military coup. While he was off getting drunk, he was killed by a man named Zimri, who became king after him. He acted without his army's support, and the army revolted against him. And his reign only lasted how long? A week. All right? Now, going over to the right, you'll see that after Abijah in Israel, a man reigned 41 years. I've got him circled because he's a righteous king. He's a godly king by the name of Asa. Asa and his son Jehoshaphat were the only kings mentioned in 1 Kings who did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Only Asa and Jehoshaphat in 1 Kings. Now, not talking 2 Kings, but in 1 Kings were the only 2 that did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He began some religious reforms. He drove out heathen cults out of the land. Where those cults come from? Rehoboam and Abijah. They allowed them to come in. And so Asa kicked out these cults. He welcomed to Judah many of the refugees from Israel who wanted to come back to where God was being worshipped. He welcomed refugees. Late in his reign, though, he backslid. And, well, you can study about that. Going back to the backside, now we back to the 10 northern tribes of Israel, and we see that during the same reign of Asa, a man named Omri is now king. Secular historians, I've already told you this, rate Omri as one of Israel's most powerful and capable political leaders. He founded the city of Samaria, which would remain Israel's capital for 150 years. But he gets scant mention in the Bible. It dismisses him because it says that Omri sinned more than all those before him. Righteous king or unrighteous? Unrighteous. In fact, in those 10 northern tribes, how many were righteous? No, not one were righteous. So after Omri, guess what? Here he comes. Ahab, the most evil, wicked king of those 10 northern tribes. He married the notorious Jezebel, a pagan priestess, and he installed Baal worship as Israel's official religion. It was during his reign that Elijah appears on the scene. And God gave Ahab plenty of opportunities to reform. Ahab humbled himself at least once, postponing disaster, but a nasty incident over Naboth's vineyard sealed his fate. Politically, Ahab forged a successful alliance with Israel's neighbor Judah, with Jehoshaphat. During Ahab's reign, this horrible king, Jehoshaphat, a godly king, by the way, a righteous king, signs a treaty, and they have an alliance for a period of time. And the divided kingdoms live at peace for the first time since Jeroboam. Ultimately, however, his evil practices would spread into Judah. Because of that alliance, evil creeps into those 2 southern tribes. So after Asa, you see Jehoshaphat, another godly king. I've got his name circled because he's a righteous king. He served for 25 years. He sent out princes. Now think of this. He sent out princes to teach the book of the law to the cities of Judah. He established courts of justice throughout the country. It's like he sent Sunday school teachers out everywhere to teach people the Word of God. He had one huge mistake, though, when he linked himself to Israel's wicked king Ahab through marriage and a military alliance. So after Jehoshaphat comes Jehoram, but we'll get to him in just a minute. After Ahab is Ahaziah. He continued to worship Baal and to fight against Elijah. Then after him for 12 years is Joram, and Joram continues over in the next column. He modified some of the worship of Baal, and at times he had a respectful relationship with Elisha, the prophet that followed Elijah. But he fell victim to Jehu's arrow. And Jehu, who killed him by arrow, became king, who reigned for 28 years. He was a military man. He began a holy mission to purge Ahab's influence out of Israel and Judah, but consistently overstepped his bounds. He killed Joram. He had Jezebel thrown from a window as one of my favorite childhood stories. I love that story because they threw her out, and what happened to her? And licked the blood that washed out of the fun story. He also, Jehu, slew 70 princes, piling their heads in 2 heaps by a gate. Unfortunately, Jehu's zeal for violence didn't translate into zeal for justice. Israel began to lose their political strength under Jehu. So, now, while all that's happening, Joram and Jehu, you got in the Judah, Jehoram, who ruled for 8 years after 60 good years under Asa and Jehoshaphat. Think of that. 60 years of righteousness for the most part. Isn't that awesome? 60 years of righteousness. Judah experienced a terrible regression under Jehoram. He began by killing his brother and then marrying Athaliah, who was daughter of Israel's... He married Ahab's daughter. And Jezebel as their daughter. He brought Baal worship in. Elijah, who mostly prophesied to those 10 northern tribes, he sent Judah's king Joram a letter predicting that he would have a severe bowel disease and that he would lead to his death. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. So after he dies from that horrible bowel disease, Amaziah comes to reign, but he only reigns for a year, and he's just a puppet of Athaliah. Just a puppet of Athaliah. He falls victim to the bloody purge of Jehu. So Jehu comes in to kill him. You see Jehu over on the left. And so then we look at this 7-year reign of the only queen of these 2 southern tribes, Athaliah. She kills her infant grandchildren to remove the rivals to the throne. Can you imagine that? Killing your grandkids. So they can't take the throne from you. But guess what? She misses one. She misses one. She leads the kingdom into a very dark time of Baal worship and evil. One heir escapes, I just mentioned that, escapes. He's the young Joash, and he is hidden away by his mother. And he emerges at the age of 7 to lead a revolt, with help, obviously, from the adults, against Athaliah. She is the only woman to rule either of the two kingdoms, and she was the last of Ahab's family to die. She had come within one baby. Now listen, this is what's important about Athaliah. She came to within one baby of destroying the Davidic covenant in David's line. But could she do that? No. Because who really hid Joash? Who really protected Joash? He was true to the Davidic covenant. But she came within one baby. Sound like what Herod wanted to do with Jesus? She killed all those grandchildren. Now, don't you think Satan was behind that? To destroy the Davidic line? But he couldn't use her at all. Flipping over to the back side of that page, next page. Going back to Israel, we see Jehoahaz, who rules for 17 years. After all his father Jehu had done to exterminate Baal worship, Jehoahaz immediately reinstates it. Embarrassing military defeats in his 17 years. He didn't turn to God. He did, though, turn to God in desperation at least once, and Israel got some reprieve. You can find that story in 2 Kings 13. After Jehoahaz, you've got Jehoash, who ruled for 16 years. He didn't break the evil patterns of Israel's kings. He showed some bright spots. He honored the prophet Elisha, and God allowed him to recover much of the territory that Aram had taken from Israel. But notice that Judah also has a king named Joash, which is the shortened version of Jehoash. Okay, so you might get confused about those two. After Jehoash's reign, 41 years, Jeroboam II reigns. Remember, the first king of the 10 northern tribes was a man named Jeroboam, and now we've got Jeroboam II. God gave Israel one last chance under King Jeroboam II. The king ruled a strong, prosperous nation at the time. It was during his reign that Jonah and Hosea and Amos ministered. Israel survived as a nation for only a few decades after a stable period under Jeroboam II. Which leads us to Zechariah and Shallum, which ruled only 7 months. After Jeroboam II, the nation splintered into rival factions. Both of these men died violently. Then you've got, for a 10-year reign of Menahem over on the other side. He gained the throne by murder. Then Assyria begins their 3 invasions. Israel's World War I begins, and it occurs during his years. He frantically tries to buy off the Assyrians. And you know you can't buy off the enemy.